Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Semgrep community event. Today, we are so excited to welcome Meghna Vikram, who at only 17 years old is the founder of CryptaML and a public speaker who has spoken at B-Side Salt Lake City, B-Sides Knoxville, and ISC2 in Orlando. So today, Magna is going to share her exploration of some research she did using a ChatGPT-4 powered machine learning model to identify and mitigate software vulnerabilities using Semgrep. If you have any questions throughout this session, feel free to leave them in the chat or ask them with the question function, and Magna will get to them at the end. So without further ado, take it away, Meghna.
Thank you. So here, I'll go ahead and share my screen. Can you guys see this?
Yes.
Perfect. So hi, everyone. My name is Meghna Vikram, and this is my talk, Who Makes the Rules? So before we begin, a little bit about me. That's me as a kid. But basically, I kind of wanted to share a little bit about my cybersecurity journey and how I kind of got to where I am now. So when I was little, my dad is the chief manager of enterprise information systems at Stetson University. And my dad was always clicking away on his laptop when I was a kid and was always, doing such important things. And I was really interested to see, what is this guy doing all the time? Why isn't he playing with me? And so as I got older, he started to teach me more about cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and kind of what he was doing at his work. And so that kind of got me thinking. And so in the 6th grade, when I was 11 years old, I started conducting my very first research project. So in 2019, my first science fair project happened. It was called Artificially Intelligent or Intelligently Artificial. And it was, to be frank, a very horrible project. I took Siri, I took Cortana, Google Home, Alexa. I asked them a bunch of questions and I called it AI. It was kind of a dumb project, but it kind of got me thinking and got me going into science fair, and especially in this realm of artificial intelligence. And so in 2021, for the first time, I got first place, which was during the COVID era, with my project called Identical Identity, where I basically, during COVID, there was touchless authentication was becoming the biggest thing. We were all wearing masks. Touch ID was going to spread COVID. So everyone was wearing masks, but how are we supposed to use touchless authentication? So I really explored biometric authentication, retina scanning, and that's what got me first place with this project for the first time. And I later expanded on it into 2022, and I received an award from the US Naval Research Academy. And then in February of 2024, I received first place again for my current project, which you guys will be learning as I talk through this talk, and I was able to receive an award from the U.S. Air Force Research Laboratory as well. And then I went on to go to Lockheed Martin for a science competition where I received first place in the software category. Then I went into the state finalists. I was a state finalist in the Florida State Championship where I won 3rd place, which scored me a ticket to the International Science and Engineering Fair in May of 2024 in LA. And there I was, out of 62 countries that were there at that fair, I was in the top 50 for the system software category, being one of the very few girls to be there. So I'm very proud of that. And for my public speaking experience, I've presented at B-Side Salt Lake City, B-Sides Knoxville, as Amanda said earlier, ISC Squared in Orlando, and now I'm here. So to kind of show you guys a little bit about ISEF, which is the International Fair, these are some pictures. The first picture was the public day where I got to talk to kids. The middle picture is just the LA Convention Center. And then the last picture were the other 3 finalists that went with me from Florida. And now to kind of introduce my research. So in modern day cybersecurity, everyone knows that data breaches happen all the time. Data is exposed, there's money lost, there's information that are put in the wrong hands, and just in general, data is exposed in a way that it shouldn't. And the reason why this happens, I'm sure everyone here knows, is because of vulnerabilities in their software. And so currently there are lots of mitigation strategies for vulnerabilities, but they're usually in the form of static analysis tools. And so my research wanted to see how I can make this dynamic using artificial intelligence. So here I am presenting at Semgrep. And so currently Semgrep is one of the leading static analysis tools, as you guys know. You guys have lots of different like pattern matching, AST matching, custom rules. Like it's a very, very prevalent static analysis tool to catch these vulnerabilities in software. But I wanted to see if something as a dynamic analysis tool could be created. So my research basically stemmed from me kind of learning about you guys and then expanding on it. So basically, what I did is when I was kind of trying to decide between the 4 tools, which one I would use, so I kind of looked at Pylint, Flake8, Bandit, and of course you guys. And this graph here is the reason why I chose Semgrep. Because first of all, Pylint and Flake8, they're linting tools. So they're kind of looking towards stylish issues, or like they're kind of over the top issues that don't really affect the meat of the code, versus something like Semgrep or Bandit. They're more in depth into the actual technical vulnerabilities that can be found. And so as you can see on this graph, which is basically showing the time that the output took, Semgrep was the fastest out of all of them, which is why I decided to go with Semgrep. So to actually introduce my project a little bit, so the goal of my research once again was to partner generative artificial intelligence with external researchers such as Semgrep to generate novel rules to actually help developers. So Semgrep uses YAML file rules, and especially when you go through like your entire repository of rules, everything is written in YAML, and it's very easy to traverse if you understand YAML. But the thing is, I didn't understand YAML. That was something very new to me. So I wanted to see if I could use AI to make this project or process a little simpler, and just to see if I could use AI to make this process that Semgrep already has even better. So for the 5 vulnerabilities that I chose for my research, I chose denial of service, eval injections, cross-site scripting attacks, broken authentication, and SQL injections. And the reason why I chose these 5 vulnerabilities in specific was because of OWASP. What's really cool about these 5 vulnerabilities is, especially in JavaScript, they have such a prevalence. And the reason why I chose JavaScript as the language that I was studying for this project was because, once again, I'm 17. I don't have as much experience with other languages such as C++, Ruby, and as you see later in this project, like I start compiling code, and there's just a lot of things that can go into compiling Java or C++, because you have to assemble, or you have to learn assembly languages and things like that. So JavaScript was my best course of action for this project, which is why I chose these 5 vulnerabilities in the realm of JavaScript. So when I downloaded Semgrep, I kind of started to see in the repository, like, okay, you guys have all these different vulnerabilities listed, and there's all these different rules in there. So I focused on the 5 vulnerabilities that I mentioned earlier. And again, my goal was to see if ChatGPT can be used to kind of learn these rules, and maybe even come up with new rules to kind of broaden the repository that already exists. And so I did a lot of researching on how ChatGPT can get the most efficient output. Because the thing is, if you want efficient output, if you want the most optimal output, you have to give it optimized input. So I found this thing called shot prompting. And shot prompting is basically where you have, let's say you're trying to talk to ChatGPT. A 0-shot prompt would be, hey, do this. A 1-shot prompt would be, hey, do this, and here's an example. So the word shot is basically saying example. 2-shot prompts is, here's do this, here's 2 examples. 3-shot is 3 examples, and so on and so forth. And so basically, shot prompting is kind of there to set a guideline for the more context you give ChatGPT, the more optimal your outtake will be. So obviously the 3-shot prompt was the most nuanced when it came to coming up with YAML rules. So what I did is I contacted ChatGPT or OpenAI, and I got an API key from them. And they told me about this thing called Playground. So there's, if you can see on the screen here, so the Playground is basically just like how ChatGPT usually looks, except on the left side, you have this customizable interface. So you can name your bot, you can teach it things. So in the instructions area, you can see that I said, see Semgrep rule here, and I copy pasted in a rule. So there I inputted Semgrep rules, I inputted, how to read a YAML file rule. I inputted like messed up vulnerable code, and then I didn't give it what was wrong in the code. But the Semgrep rule I gave it corresponded with what it should find in the code. So this was the beginning of my training process with ChatGPT. And over and over and over, I kept feeding it lots of different types of inputs. For example, I would put in a prompt that says, find what's wrong. Here's 2 examples of fixed code. And this code is code that has been rectified to, let's say, mitigate a SQL vulnerability or something like that. And so this training process took months and months. And if you even ask me to pull out my journal, I have pages of input and output from GPT-4. But if you can see on the right side, that's my actual face value input. That's where I'm basically saying, here's some code, find what's wrong with it. But on the left side, that's where the training was happening, where in the instructions I'm telling ChatGPT, this is the Semgrep rule, this is how you read the rule, like here's what I think could be wrong. And then we were trying to see how the output was. So what I did to kind of measure this output was obviously on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being GPT was elevating what Semgrep was already able to find, and 1 being the Semgrep exists and GPT didn't really enhance it. So on that scale, I kind of did some measurements. So as you can see on the bar graph, with the 0-shot prompt, there wasn't much of a difference between Semgrep and GPT. But as the shots increased in number, the GPT was able to elevate the risk and elevate what Semgrep was saying to a much higher degree. This will make a little bit more sense in the next couple slides. But basically, what Semgrep was finding, it was finding just like ChatGPT was finding all of that. But my goal here was to see if this could be a dynamic tool, if it could find more than what's already known. So I launched a product called Crypt ML, where this is basically where Semgrep in my project a little bit detaches. And this is where the dynamicness of my project really came in. And so Crypta and I, we go hand in hand, and I've really been working on it for a while. But basically, Crypta is just a simple shell script that uses Semgrep in a part of it, but it basically does a lot of more filtration processes to really get a optimal output in a more dynamic way. So this is the shell script. This is just the base code of it, just for presentation purposes. So you can see kind of they're separated into steps. So step 1 is where I input a piece of JavaScript code. And that input is then checked for syntactical errors, because of course those are also always there. And then step 2. So step 2 is iterating through CWEs to see instance matches. So a CWE is just a collection of vulnerable code. And when I say a collection, it's huge. It is this gigantic collection of vulnerable code. Just for a little bit of an example, this is one snippet of the CWE collections that I used in my project. So what this collection is basically every CWE ID, for example, CWE 787, the one in the top left corner. There are 39,343 different instances of the same vulnerability that CWE 787 is. So, for example, I think that one is SQL injection, because that's super common. So 787 has 39,000 instances that are all unique of the same vulnerability. And that's something that I think Semgrep was a little bit lacking in when it came to really understanding what dynamically could go wrong with the rule. For example, like Semgrep, since it is a static nature and tool, it's a tool that's static in nature, it kind of like it can't pick up vulnerabilities that have runtime behavior, like anything to do with runtime behavior. It can't pick up dynamic inputs, code generation codes, like anything like that. It can't pick up, but there still could be vulnerabilities in code such as that. So what I wanted to see is by training my model using CWEs, if it could find more than what Semgrep was already finding. So that's basically step 2. And the iteration of this was basically like, let's say you're going through some error code that you've put in and CWE 910 pops up. Okay, so this error was found. But in the code that CWE 910 is, or whatever number I just said, there was also this vulnerability found, which takes you to CWE 300. Then you go to 300 and this vulnerability was found. So it goes down this process of going through all of these different instances of false or vulnerable code to really get a scope of what could be wrong in the one input that you give. So that's all step 2 is doing. Now, step 3 is actually going through and it's calling GPT and doing exactly what I said it was doing on Playground. It's going through and it's putting in the prompt. But I chose obviously the 3-shot prompt because it was having the best results in comparison to Semgrep. So it's going through calling GPT API and evaluating the applicable rules that can be generated, and it then generates the YAML file. Then, since Semgrep has this analysis tool where you can input things back in to kind of fact check what GPT was coming up with based off of Semgrep, I would put the rule output that it just generated back into Semgrep for kind of like a double, like a cross check. And then step 5 was something that I actually never expected to happen. So as you guys saw in the Playground snippet, all I'm saying is here's some code, generate a rule to identify whatever vulnerabilities you find. I never asked it to rectify code. So in my first couple trials, it didn't. But as I started getting deeper into my trials, on my 4th trial, 5th trial, 6th, it started coming up with these little paragraphs. And it was explaining what the YAML rule is. So not only was it giving what I asked for, but that's the beauty of machine learning. It knew kind of what I was trying to do at one point. And it started giving me these little paragraphs explaining what the rule is saying. And then later and deeper into my trials, not only was it giving me this paragraph explaining the YAML rule that it came up with, since it differs from the Semgrep YAML rule that was inputted, it started actually giving me a line-by-line filtration of what went wrong and here's a fixed version. So it would literally have the line, like line 17, here's the fixed code. And obviously this code is just there for reference. If you code in a different style, that's on you. But it kind of just shows what was wrong. And it really sat there and taught the developer, or at least gave it all the resources to teach the developer what was wrong, how to rectify it, and here's the rectified version. And then, of course, step 6 was the little completion method or message that, hey, your evaluation is complete. So I have a video of this actually running, but I'll go to that in a second. So this slide kind of shows what I'm trying to portray here. So on this side is Semgrep and on this side is GPT. So Semgrep, this is one of my trials, and I put in a piece of code. So number 1, it says the severity is warning. So when you're a developer and you see a warning, it's like, oh, okay, like here, I should take note of that. But it's not something that jars out to you. It's not something that you're like, oh, I'm immediately going to fix it. And the one ID or the vulnerability it found was unsafe concatenation. That's great. Now, so when you compare this to GPT, the severity changed from warning to error. And as a developer, when you see error, all of a sudden you're like, oh, like that has to change. And that simple severity change from warning to error has a significant role when it comes to a developer's point of view. And then, of course, it found the unsafe concatenation vulnerability that Semgrep had, but it also went along to find 3 more. So it found through the CWEs more vulnerabilities that were present because of all the instances that were fed into Semgrep. And again, as a developer, this is great. You turn on my software, you go for a walk, go to Chick-fil-A, you come home and it tells you everything you did wrong, you fix it, you're good. So I think it was a very efficient use of AI to kind of expand on what's already out there as a developer. So here's kind of what I was saying with the CWEs. So you can see here, like CWE 943 was identified, but CWE 942 was also identified right there. So in context, what this means is they're so close in number. Of course, there's 564, there's 926, there's other CWEs that are there, but for the sake of explaining this, 943 and 942, they're right next to each other in the CWE codes. And they're almost the exact same thing. Improper neutralization of special elements used in an SQL command. That's great. But if this was ran through Semgrep, SQL injection, that's all that would pop up. It wouldn't go so deep into these little nuances that are literally two different CWEs, even though they're right next to each other, which is what my project enhanced. So these CWEs were giving so much more context to GPT. So then over here, it shows you that little paragraph I was mentioning. It says there's a detected SQL statement that's tainted, why it's tainted, blah, blah, blah. This could lead to a SQL injection if the variable is user controlled. So it's telling you what's wrong. And then over here, there's the little line change where it's like, here's how ChatGPT thinks your code should be written instead. And for little cuteness, it even shows you where the command ends. So it's a very useful and efficient tool in a sense where it's giving you so much more than what you asked for, but it's also teaching you at the same time. So here's the video that I was mentioning earlier. So it's the same steps that I was mentioning on the code. Step 1, it's evaluating for syntax. Step 2, it calls the GPT API and evaluates the CWEs, finds the associated CWEs. Then it goes through and it evaluates it through the rules that were generated in Semgrep, comes out with the IDs, which is like that side-by-side comparison slide I just showed you, creates the YAML file, and here at the end is the lines that are rectified, and then your little vulnerability check complete thing. Step 5, where it shows the generating the rectified code, which is here your rectified code, and now the process is over. So basically, this kind of sums up the same thing that I was saying. It goes through and it gives you a YAML rule. It expands on what Semgrep gave you, gives you a paragraph teaching what the output was, gives you a line-by-line filtration, and then rectifies your code for you. So some limitations of my project as we near the end. Basically, the only language that I was able to study in this project was JavaScript, because JavaScript is the only language that I was comfortable with the scope of research that I was able to perform on. For example, if I were to use Java, I would have to learn assembly code, and that's not something that I could with the time that I had. And then also enhancing CryptaML is something that I really would like to do, because someone at ISEF told me, what if Semgrep did not have a vulnerability in their repository? And I was like, what do you mean? And they were like, what if there's a vulnerability that's not listed? And with the ever-evolving world of cybersecurity, vulnerabilities are going to pop out of nowhere that maybe Semgrep hasn't caught yet. And what am I going to do since I'm using AI in a situation like that? And that's where the beauty of the CWEs would come in, because it's not going to be a whole new vulnerability that no one's ever seen before. It's going to be kind of tagged onto a vulnerability that already exists just without an ID. And using all those CWEs in my iterations are going to then kind of help this software find that vulnerability, because there's so many different instances that could be found in this new vulnerability, which is the beauty of AI. And so using artificial intelligence in a situation like this would help find new vulnerabilities and help combat data breaches before they happen, even in the situation where there's a data breach happening on code where the vulnerabilities are new. So ending notes. So CryptaML, my project, the main purpose was to add on to what Semgrep has. And instead of having a static resource, which is what Semgrep is, just to kind of add on to what they already do. And Crypta produces a more made-to-order response in a sense, where I'm inputting something and the rule that's generated is exactly tailored to fit the input that I gave, versus Semgrep has the rule existing that then you iterate and understand. So that was the biggest change I took from Semgrep software into my own. And A little bit of a thank you. These are my 3 mentors. So Dr. Daniel Plant from Stetson University, he was my main mentor, along with Dr. Joshua Eckroth, who's no longer at Stetson University. However, he is still helping me greatly. And of course, my dad, who's the guy at the bottom. He's the Enterprise Resource Planning and Information Security Head at Stetson University. So with that, thank you, and I'm open to questions now.
If anyone wants to learn more about you or connect with you to chat more about your research, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Yeah, so I have a personal email. I can give that out. And I also have LinkedIn. I can put them in the chat.
That would be fantastic. Then we can go ahead and end the session. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And special thanks to you, Meghna, for sharing your research and joining us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, bye, everyone. We will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.